welcome. Women in AI is a global network of female experts and professionals in the field of artificial intelligence, working towards a gender-inclusive AI that benefits a global society. We have over 12,000 members across 140 countries, and we founded the Women in AI Canada organization in 2020, and we're represented across 7 cities in Canada. So our topic for today, as you all may know, is responsible AI. I'm sure a lot of you have heard this topic discussed more broadly. So we're hoping that you'll get a different perspective today and learn more about the different approaches to responsible AI. And we understand that our attendees come from a diverse background and have different experiences working with AI. And we'd love to understand what everybody's professional background is. So if you wouldn't mind, please use the chat function to share in your title. You don't need to share the name of your organization, but it would be helpful to understand what your role is, how you work with AI. I think it would be really helpful for our panelists today to understand that. And you'll note that we've also started a poll. It would be great if you could contribute to that. Just want to get an understanding of where everybody is at in terms of their own organization and how they're implementing responsible AI practices. So this morning, in preparation for this event, I thought, it would be a good experiment to kind of track all of the times I've interacted with AI, just from the moment that I woke up to now, this afternoon. And so I thought about it, and I thought, okay, well, the first interaction I had was, I'm not perfect. So it was in bed, I was on Instagram, just scrolling through Instagram. And then I used, there's a news aggregator that I like to sift through the daily news on, so I used that as well. And then as I headed over to work, I listened to a podcast, and then I got a little bit bored of that podcast, and I decided to listen to some music, and I, chose to listen to music on Spotify. And I thought about, in that short span of time, how many interactions I've already had with AI. And it's ubiquitous, right? AI is just integrated into our daily life. And there are so many different use cases for AI. And the way that they impact or influence us is just so unique and can be so different depending on how we use it. Some of the uses of AI could have a more significant impact on our lives than others, and I'm sure we're well aware of what some of these examples would be. And what we're seeing right now is really this global push to put some sort of guardrails in place to kind of regulate how AI is being used in order to limit the potential for negative consequences that could flow from the use of AI. And a lot of these, for those of you who have been paying attention to what's happening out there, a lot of these frameworks that are being developed in mind to regulate the most negative potential consequences of AI, so the highest impact or the highest risk. But before that, before any sort of firm rules come into place, what we're also seeing now is organizations who are taking more of a proactive approach to implement guardrails for the use of AI within their organizations in advance of any sort of legal requirements. So a recent survey done by Conversica reported that it was a survey that was done with 500 business leaders. It reported that almost 3/4, so about 73% of respondents said that AI guidelines are indispensable, absolutely need AI guidelines in place. However, out of that base of survey respondents, only 6% mentioned that they had established clear ethical guidelines for the use of AI. And 36% indicated that they might put guidelines in place during the next 12 months. And so what we see is there's an understanding that we need something in place, but a lot of organizations are still in the early stages of determining how that happens within their organization. And so the focus of our discussion today will be to understand what approaches organizations can take if they do want to establish a responsible AI framework. And so before we begin our discussion, just as a general housekeeping rule, we will be taking questions from the audience, and we'll be addressing them at the end of the conversation. So if you have any questions that you want to pose to any of the panelists, please feel free to put them in the chat. And before we get started, I'll introduce some of our panelists today. So first, we have Jesslyn Dymond. So Jesslyn Dymond is the Director of Data Ethics at TELUS, and she leads their approach to responsible data-driven innovation, including the Responsible AI Portfolio and the Data for Good program. So thanks for joining us, Jesslyn. I know you have a really unique perspective on AI governance. Next, we have Katrina Ingram. She's the founder and CEO of Ethically Aligned AI, and that's a company that's focused on helping organizations drive better outcomes in the design, development, and deployment of AI systems. We also have Pamela Gupta. So Pamela Gupta is the CEO and co-president of Trusted AI. It's an AI governance, risk strategy, and program creation company based in the US. And lastly, we have Dominique Payette. She's a senior technology and privacy lawyer at RBC, and she has industry experience working in responsible AI. And I'll be moderating the discussion today. My name is Kuljit Bhogal, and I'm an associate in the Privacy and Data Management Group at Osler, Hoskin & Harcourt. And I am the expert lead of Responsible AI for the Women in AI organization. So with that, we can start the discussion. And to set the stage, I'll turn it over to Katrina first to kind of discuss exactly what responsible AI is and why it's important.
Well, thanks so much, Kuljit. And I'm really excited to be spending some time with the Women in AI community today to talk about one of my favorite subjects, responsible AI and AI ethics. And Kuljit's done a wonderful job of setting the stage. One thing I want to call out is that AI is an infrastructure. It's kind of everywhere. It's pretty much ubiquitous. It's in everything. So it's not just about going to a product called ChatGPT and interacting with a chatbot. So I think that's a really important thing to know. I'll start to answer this question with a little bit of a personal story about my why. Why am I here? Why am I doing this work? And for that, I want to take you back to 2018. So I was a grad student. I'd gone back to school to figure out what I wanted to do next with my career. And that's where I first encountered this topic of AI ethics. I wandered into this lecture that was being given by a professor. And at that time, it was all about autonomous vehicles. We were talking about AI gone wrong scenarios and how are we going to ensure that we have safety on the roads and all of these things that might happen. And that's what really captured my attention on this topic, is this social justice component. So we can think about responsible AI from that perspective, a response to some of the things that we've seen gone wrong with AI systems so far. That's maybe the negative side of it. We can flip that around though, and we can think about, okay, well, what are the things that we can do differently? What are the things that we can do better? And that's another way to think about responsible AI. And that involves a range of things. It involves things like cybersecurity. It involves things like privacy and regulation. It involves thinking about ethics. Ethics is a really good question to ask when you have these should questions. Should we do this and should we do that? And technology raises a lot of these should questions. And then kind of underpinning all of that is this idea of accountability and responsibility. Who's going to be accountable and responsible when we use these AI systems? And so that to me sort of encompasses this larger field of responsible AI. And in terms of why it's important, I go back to those social justice roots. We want to make sure that we're creating a society that's inclusive and is going to embrace everyone. And we don't want to create harms for people as we're rolling out AI systems. So that's a little bit of background about me, why I'm here, what this field is all about.
Great. And so that's great background. And it's interesting that you mentioned that when you first went into that conversation or you went into that classroom, the topic was autonomous vehicles, and to see how far we've progressed now, it's sometimes I look back to last year and think about where we were, and it's like so much has changed just in such a small amount of time. And so when we are thinking about responsible AI, what What exactly are some of, I guess, what is the value add of having a responsible AI framework? And I'm going to put this to all of the panelists. So I mentioned that stat at the beginning of our conversation about a lot of organizations or business leaders think that it is important, but very few actually have something in place. So what would you say would be the benefits of an organization that actually has a mature, responsible AI framework in place?
I'll just take a first stab at that. So I come from an industry background of creating solutions that businesses can adopt, right? And trying to anticipate where the roadblocks are going to come from. So the way I'm looking at this is, I'll share my personal story later when when you go to my why I'm doing this and why I think it's really critical. Because I believe in the positive outcomes, and this is so poised for democratizing. I'm going to use terms, I'm sorry, that are maybe hype words, but very true. How we can reduce that gap between what is for the few to bring the value of technology down to everyone, such as, what is the quintessential hope for AI, for example, personalization, right? You can have the best experience for best code, create the best of you and for your organization. But the only way that's possible is if we take a look at what can go wrong, how can we prevent it, what is new from what we have already seen, and relate it to what we have already seen, such as a good governance framework. But what else do we need? Some of the terms are going to be the same, but they're going to mean and have such different impact that it's really important that we look at it holistically and we do it right at the foundation, which is why, in my company's logo, Trusted AI, we have I as the DNA strand. I'll just move over, meaning if we don't do it at the very outset, chances of harm go up and chances of wrong outcomes go up, because these are not easy systems to build. And so I'll just stop there, but it is really important that we look at it foundationally.
I would add to that, that for me, it's about trust. So I work on a team that is very focused on ensuring that we have a trust relationship with our customers, communities, and Canadians in general. And we need to ensure that this exciting technology of AI and all the benefits that it has to promise are really coming to light. And part of that is ensuring that people feel like they can trust the technology and that it is trustworthy AI. So when we look at it, we really need to have that kind of people-centric view in mind. And for me, that's a huge part of what we want to achieve with responsible AI. Like, I've heard that expression of AI as augmented intelligence, like we're the intelligent part, the people, and AI provides an opportunity to really enhance that. And so when I'm thinking about what we're trying to achieve here, it's really about ensuring that people trust the technology and it's working for us for the benefits and the outcomes that people are looking for from it.
I can just add a little bit to that, because the way I'm looking at it, where I'm coming from it, is how do we build these systems with trust, as well as foster that trust by responsible use, right? So that's where I see trustworthy and responsible AI kind of coming together, that we use these systems responsibly, ethically, etc. And that can be all governed by regulations, for example. But the way we build these systems and implement them, that's where a lot of the cybersecurity and the privacy and transparency principles of trust that that I stand for, that I've defined 8 essential elements of trustworthy AI. That's where it goes in my view. So absolutely, just building on what Jesslyn said, that it's creating trust that these systems will deliver what we want them to deliver and what we expect from them, and then having that trust that, yes, we're building them with trust and we trust them. So.
And I'll just chime in with one more comment. I think having a framework and having these conversations about principles is really an opportunity for organizations to ensure value alignment. So I think a lot about value alignment. How are we living our values? We have a whole history of this with the good work that we've done in corporate social responsibility, ESG, and so forth. And this is a piece of that for me. This is an opportunity for organizations to really take these technologies and align them, use them in ways that are going to enable their values, whatever those are.
Kuljit, I'd like to provide just a slightly different lens, and before I do so, I want to mention that my opinions today are my own, not that of any employers, and also encourage attendants to continue putting your roles in the chat if you feel comfortable. It's super cool to see like the many different backgrounds and profiles that are on here today, and it helps us. Well, it helps me kind of cater my answers. So I'm a lawyer, so I look a lot at the legal side of responsible AI, but I've worked for many years with businesses that are trying to deploy AI. And I think one thing that is very important in responsible AI discussions is, I'll call it proportionality. I've seen responsible AI initiatives that were super well intended be a little bit of a solution without a problem. People are very concerned. Champions in responsible AI are doing amazing jobs at advocacy. And so it's important for the responsible AI framework or policy, or however you call it in your organization, not to supersede the actual deployment, because it can kind of hurt the AI deployment efforts if it's not done in a proportional way and in a nuanced enough way. Okay, so I agree with everything that was said. Responsible AI is key actually for I'll say AI scalability. We're seeing, and I'm talking from the perspective of industries that are, I'll call them legacy industries. My perspectives is from an industry that is trying to like move to like a technology and AI based program. I'm not talking about like the GAFAM, the FANG that are, I think have different realities, but from an industry that is, long-standing, the move from paper and legacy systems to like digital transformation is a hard one. And it's important in the way we think about responsible AI to adapt to that and make sure it's not like a stop or like a significant slowdown to AI adoption. However, it's important for businesses to understand that these are key considerations for AI scalability. So to go from little proof of concept everywhere to actually deploying AI at a scalable measure, if you will. And sometimes businesses are a little bit too reluctant to address them, but it would actually help them to think about these things and address them like by design or earlier than just before deploying, or the risk people haven't been involved, right? So there's a really important balance to strike in responsible AI versus AI deploying and making sure it's proportional.
I like that. And I think everybody kind of would agree that when you're saying proportionality, I think you really got to think about what is it that you're building? How are you using it, right? What are the data elements? Like how sensitive is the data? And what is the end result? Like what is the intended use for this when you're thinking about how you need to build out the framework? I think those are key things to consider. And so that really leads us to the next piece of this conversation, which is really how do you actually go about and design a responsible AI framework? Jesslyn, you have some reactions. I feel like you have something to say to this. Do you want to share your thoughts?
Oh, I was just enjoying your transition there. And I think With respect to what Dominique just shared about scalability, I think that's a very unique aspect of AI, right? Like we've been dealing with big data and other types of data related initiatives for some time. So when you're designing a responsible AI framework, which is where you want us to go to, I think the other aspect of that for me beyond scalability is also sustainability from an environmental perspective, but also building programs that are going to continue to achieve their intended outcomes. So we want to really ensure that it's not going to be a system that, you know, is just working for now, and how do we ensure that that continues to be something that is adding value. But I would say the best way to really get a responsible AI framework going in an organization, building on what Katrina shared earlier, is having that conversation about your organizational values, and using those to kind of sync up on what the principles of responsible AI look like for your organization, because you will see a huge convergence around what the principles and in practicing and applying responsible AI tools, techniques, methods happening. There's, you know, we've got the proposed code around generative AI. We have ADA, like these in Canada that include very distilled sets of principles that kind of align with other best practices and emerging standards out there. But it has to connect from an organizational perspective with the work you're doing and the values that your teams are already thinking about, and really use that to kind of apply to the work you are undertaking with AI. I know an example of this from TELUS's point of view was the principle of being customer first. When we set out to build out our responsible AI page, and really outline what we mean by responsible AI, we did a lot of research to hear from Canadians and understand their sentiments, fears, concerns. And we heard lots of fear and concern, but we also heard an interest in understanding the impact of the technology, a curiosity about how it works and how it could impact them. And so I think that's a call to action that goes alongside responsible AI. Like, we need to listen and hear from Canadians about what we are striving towards, what is the objective, and this is a very important conversation that we need to have as a country and as women. And going from there, it's also to have that conversation, you need the education, the awareness, and the understanding, and what we kind of call the AI literacy. And organizations like CFAR have launched like the Destination AI training, which is free for all Canadians, to help them understand. I mean, it's a 5-hour course, so buckle up, but that's really foundational to learning and understanding and participating in this important movement and dialogue that we need today.
That's great.
So like organizational to like, where are we going as a country here?
That's great. And Justin, I'm curious about that because I know TELUS has put on this initiative to understand how Canadians feel. To what extent do you take that information and, you know, start building your program with those considerations in mind?
Yeah, so if you check out our site for responsible AI, we actually don't restate principles there. It's focused on examples and awareness, and includes that call to action to really invite people to share their feedback and input, and that helps shape both our guardrails internally and where we go with the technology, but informs the broader conversation that's happening around what does good look like when it comes to AI governance.
Right. And so I know there's different approaches to the frameworks you can put in place. As you mentioned, Jesslyn, there are obviously standards. There's the NIST AI risk framework. OECD has a framework in place, and there's a lot of different examples that you can turn to when you're thinking about how you implement something like this within your organization, and then you align it with the values of your organization to see what approach is the best. And I'm wondering, I mean, I know Katrina and Pamela, you help organizations put these programs in place all the time. Are you seeing organizations implement more of a prescriptive rules-based approach, or is it more of a principles-based approach? What is the trend? What do you think works well, or what doesn't work well?
Okay, do you want me to go further? I'm happy to do that. So if we look at the NIST AI framework, and that is based a lot on the, current best practices, such as OECD's principles. These are all principle based, right? And they are very, very high level. So kind of to piece it together with, the existing the conversation we've had so far, the true value for anything which is framework based is going to be extremely contextual, which is what is my business objective, what is my, and then in a business, there is more than one AI system, right? There are more than one deployment of AI. So what's working best for me, I can tell you, the approach we are taking is really to build a center of excellence when it comes to AI. So the real value for our organization is to go across, break the silos that exist typically in a company with different business units, and to take that context level to a more granular level, which is on a business unit based. So what are the models you're building? What are the systems you want? What is the, that to be able to take that cultural, the business culture, which will shine through your policy, your ethics, your culture in the company, and how to really personalize it to and make it really relevant to each and every system so that it's no surprise, there's no shadow AI, there is no, like I said, a lot of the principles that we have already used for governance, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We do want to leverage those, but to make it relevant for AI, there will be some different hats, that will come into, different mindsets that we are in different risks, right? So our approach is what we think works best is a combination of taking a look at what is at a very high level. There are ISO standards, of course, that we rely on a lot as well, which are hot off the press. So there are some really good standards. But at the end of the day, even if we look at NIST AI RMF, for example, we're looking at a very trustworthy, there's a high emphasis on trustworthiness. And that includes, a very kind of horizontal layer. That is the underlying requirement of these systems. How to build that trust, that's really a very complex and a difficult problem to solve. So I'm going to stop there because I know there's quite a few more things that I can add, but I want to hear what Katrina, or I think you mentioned Katrina, or one of the other panelists, the question too. So I don't want to shadow the response, but I do have more to add, but I'll come back to that.
Yeah, I'm happy to chime in on that. And I echo everything that Pamela has said. And you need to tie principles to practices and processes. And so just to kind of share a real personal example, I spent some time recently in the public sector with a client helping them to do this. So they had their principles, they're very clear on what they were trying to do at a mission level. But practically what had to happen working with the data team is a whole lot of checklists, a whole lot of very practical things. You could call them rules, you could call them things to check for that they needed to do to adhere to and tie back to these principles. So a lot of the tools that I was trying to build, because I believe a tool is not useful if you can't implement it. And NIST is massive. I've been spending time with NIST recently. It is a monster. And it's good, I think, for people whose role it is to really focus on this, but you're not going to get your data science team to read through NIST. That's not going to happen. So what are you going to do for them? You're going to have to create specific checklists and things that they can use in the context of doing their work to help them. Same with procurement. What does procurement need to know before bringing AI into an organization? They need to know specific things, questions to ask, those kinds of real practical things. And so again, I think it's about tying these things together, going from those big high-level principles to some real practical tools.
Right, and I agree with that. That center of excellence that I was talking about is going to be, tying in what Dominique and Jesslyn have said as well, different stakeholders across the organization, but they don't all need to be involved in all the project and the AI systems being developed. So it is going to be extremely use case based, and whether it's procurement, and I agree, Katrina, procurement is going to play even a bigger role now, because a lot of the systems that are coming into a company are not being built into inside. So you are buying external, whether it's a framework, whether it's a infrastructure, whether it's a system. It's going to be extremely important to be ahead of the curve when it comes to what is the risk that I have, what can go wrong from my company, what can go wrong from my intended outcome, and how much transparency do I have in the systems that we are procuring, and how do you bring them up to speed, and how do you educate them as to what they need to do. That goes back to what Jesslyn was saying as well, right? How do you train? Training, I think, has attained a even bigger, it always has been important, but I think it's an excellent way to kind of spearhead any initiative. If you are going into AI, I would say any organization, you should start with what are my values, because they're not going to be that different, right? Let's face it. We all want good outcomes. Otherwise, we won't be even adopting responsible and trustworthy AI. But what does that mean for my company? And what does that mean for procurement? What does that mean for, do that translation so it is not something that people have to pick up the phone or go through, if, I won't say NIST is a bear because I'm part of that whole thing, but it can be, you have to make it bite-sized and digestible for a company. And that's where the governance framework and the responsible framework comes in play for a company, not what's happening out in the world, because that is really important. It will influence, but you really cannot rely on best practices. That to me is a misnomer. What best practice for this particular use case? That's really where it comes down to.
And Pamela and Katrina, your perspectives are very interesting, right? Very different than mine and of Jess's probably. I'm guessing that, I'm sorry, I'm going to ask a question. Sorry, Kuljit. Like, I'm guessing that this exercise depends highly on the maturity of the organization when it comes to risk assessment. Because if you at a bank or financial institution or insurance company talk about a new checklist, you get crucified, right? Because a project in order to deploy a project, there are already like dozens, sometimes hundreds of questionnaires and checklists and blah, blah, blah. So it's very, very long. Like, I've just seen a proof of concept take 5 weeks to build and 5 months to get approved. So, but however, I'm used to an industry that is very mature in terms of risk assessment. I'm guessing that smaller companies, newer companies, and technology companies are perhaps not that mature and do need like those new checklists and those new like bite-sized, Pamela, like you say, efforts to kind of operationalize.
I think that's an excellent point, Dominique. And so I don't think we are on a different side of the, on the line here. When I'm talking about bite-sized chunks, let's to take your example, it's really that 5-month process, right, that you talked about for getting the approval. That's why the more we can leverage existing governance and existing processes in place and create the right hooks for emerging risk, right, the more effective it will be. Because if we create another whole process for a large company to go through, it may become a project that you don't have resources for, etc. The more we can make this achievable and translated to existing processes, right? Because who has not worked with checklists and having gatekeepers, right? Finding those gatekeepers, what those gatekeepers are, or who those gatekeepers are, what the gated processes are, and including the elements in there of, is it an automated system, for example, right? Is it doing automated decision making? Do we need to add data provenance, for example? I mean, I think this has to tie into existing processes, and that's how it can become even more achievable. And to your point, yes, NIST can be, and somebody said NIST, AI RMF can be extremely, overwhelming. But I would say it's a one-time effort. Do it. It's risk-based, right? And it is 80 pages as opposed to the 300 pages that existed for other RMFs. Or take OECD. But the better off you are. The more the effort you make at the outset, lesser it will be. And it doesn't have to be everyone. If there's a 100-person company, all 100 people don't have to do that effort. You have a small team that does the effort, and then it's a one-time thing, and you translate it across the organization. That to me will get you but much more sustainability and resilience for something such as creating a model, for example, or bringing in even generative AI. Now they're talking about even FLLMs, not even LLMs, right? Frontier LLMs, which are beyond what we have in existing LLMs, for example. So this is not a tide that's going to stop. But the more ahead we are, the more value we can get, because you really cannot go back and take out the leaves that are in that stream, because that's already flown, right? You want to clean the stream, and you have to be at the right place, in the right with the right stance, right?
Yeah, I love your point around synergies, finding those, and I think general understanding of data flows, like this is common to many different governance efforts and foundational, to use your word, to understanding AI. So there are synergies that you can build upon, that you need to build on to be successful in a large organization or a small one. And I think the one thing that I really get excited about with responsible AI is the opportunity of AI to kind of help us do the job here. Like there are tools and technologies that are being embedded and invented to help really inject governance into the tooling. And when we talk about scale, that's going to be absolutely essential. And this is where becoming friends with the data science and the ML engineers, the data scientists and ML engineers, is really going to help you. Because when you have these connections and start to talk about the context and the meaning of the work that they're doing, and the interest around ensuring things perform optimally, and finding those synergies around including aspects of responsible AI into performing well, right? Like if it's not acting responsibly, or if it's not responsible AI, what are we working with? Like it needs that concept of the measurement of the model, which teams are thinking about, needs to include these concerns around bias, fairness, and the context and the appropriateness of the use case. So that conversation with your data scientists and machine learning engineers can go a long way, because they have some of the expertise in the tooling, and there are open source libraries that kind of help achieve some of these outcomes that they will have vast familiarity with.
Yeah, and just to echo that, I have not met a data scientist who doesn't want to be responsible in their work. The challenge is they're not always sure how to do this. They're not always sure what this means in practice. And so when I say checklist, I'm not trying to necessarily advocate for more barriers or anything of that sort. What I do advocate for is how to weave this into a workflow in a way that works for everyone, so that we can have these kinds of ethical considerations as part of our overall workflow while also facilitating the work. And that is the challenge of doing this work.
That point around intention, Katrina, is so true, right? Like when you just connect with people, like they are trying to do the right thing. And so it's about accessibility and ensuring that they recognize the connection between their work and the impacts and the downstream and upstream points of view that need to kind of be brought together here. So I'm a huge advocate for that cross-functional squad or team that's tackling these issues, because we need to learn just as much from different voices as we're learning from within this Women in AI group as well, right? Like that diverse perspectives, different skill sets, different disciplines, different backgrounds, that is what's going to really bring out an AI that's reflecting the values of all.
I just want to add something from, you'd asked about real world experience, right? So one of the sentiments I like to echo is talking to a security officer in a company, and they said, well, data provenance is not my problem, right? I mean, so you're talking about building a security, and we're talking about different stakeholders. How do you create that right center of excellence, which goes across silos? I'd like to just reiterate that again, because it is going to be very important what the tone is from the top. If you are giving a particular stakeholder a particular responsibility, such as, let's say, a chief privacy officer or a chief security officer, or data officer, etc., and if they are going to stay within their own swim lanes, it's not going to be possible to get the best for outcome for the company. So that data, that culture we were talking about, and that business, commitment, for me, that includes how do you actually translate it into, well, this may not be a part of your data provenance, may not be, or data lineage is not something data security has to look at, but this is what needs to be done. So we have to be very clear as to who's accountable for this and how it will get done, so that it doesn't become, it's not my problem, it's somebody else's problem, and then nobody knows whose problem it is, right? So that's the practical reality, of how this plays out. So the more work we do upfront and create the right gatekeepers and the processes in place, the more important, the more better the outcomes, right, for the company.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how you get commitment. So what we've established so far in this conversation is that creating this type of framework or building this in, it's really requires an effort from a variety of different members within the organization. It doesn't just sit in one spot, right? And being a lawyer, I really relate to Dominique's comment about if you bring another checklist into the mix, you'll be crucified. I totally agree with that. But what are some of strategies that you've found to be effective to get buy-in from the business to other stakeholders, to let them know that this is important and we need to do this ahead of any sort of like legal or regulatory requirements that would force them to pay attention to this?
For me, my experience has been, I'll start. One of the things that can help is executive sponsorship. If you could get an executive to sponsor you, budget or no budget, but just like have like a green light from an executive that this is important. At the very least, your time and your salary or parts of it can go to these questions is key. It has to be on the books, because what I've seen and when I share with other like responsible AI champions is it's still something that people do beyond their day job. It's like because they're passionate, because they're champions and they're advocates, and they take these topics very seriously. When you have executive sponsorship, a project, everything goes a lot better. And that is a little bit like, for me, I've had experiences where I was advocating for months, maybe years, but then the twisting factor, like the twist plot, was the Apple credit card debacle back in 2019, where Apple and Goldman Sachs, that was like underwriting the credit card, got into a little bit of media heat because someone accused them of being discriminatory towards women in how much credit they gave. That put the topic on the map, even though nobody but the nerdy lawyers followed the investigation, and the regulator concluded there's no discrimination, but it put it on the map. And those factors you can't control, but if you can get an executive to sponsor those types of initiatives, I find it's a key factor.
Those stories definitely really help. And I think thanks to the incredible accomplishments of ChatGPT, like this conversation is happening in your organization. Right now, I assure you, no doubt, maybe, hopefully the responsible AI piece, but I think that the rapid adoption of this technology is on the minds of many leaders in different organizations and regulators. And so whether or not this becomes something that has to be done from a compliance perspective, it should already be something that we want to achieve, because it is very important that we ensure this technology is working as responsibly as possible.
Agreed. And so, sorry, Pamela, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I was just saying that there, the EU AI Act does, they're hoping to finalize that by this December. It would have, so ChatGPT slowed that down, otherwise we would have had it last December. But it is driving a lot of things that I think organizations need to be aware of, who maybe have adopted generative AI, ChatGPTs, and the LLMs of the world, or building their own, or are waiting for this to come out. But what the EU AI Act is calling for example, is transparency and data origin to be called out. So not the LLMs we have today, which are based on the foundation models today, which are built on the open internet. And you see lawsuits coming out from the Writers Guild, for example, where it learned on books and proprietary data. But there is, I think right now, if you look at the adoption of generative AI, it's either a knee-jerk reaction, which is, no, we don't want any, we are not going to allow it within our company, or there's a lot of nervousness about it as to what are the risks, what are the security risks, what are the privacy risks, what are the transparency risks. These are really going to be very important in the next few months as it shapes out. But I think I didn't think this was the way the tide was going. I didn't think it was going to be even possible to kind of hold it in check and say, well, you have to show data lineage. So really hats off to the EU AI Act for kind of at least making taking a step in that direction, which I think is extremely important. So there are risks for adoption, but if you know your organization, if you know what the usage or the use case is, right, it is very compelling. You really cannot not go the route of the autopilots and the bards and the chat GPTs, because it was very, very compelling. So I won't go into more into that, but McKinsey has done an excellent study. And I highly encourage you to read that if you are looking at what is the compelling factor for adoption of generative AI. All I would say is, if you are going to adopt it, yes, you must take a look at what does it mean for your environment, and what are the risks that can come based on, are you using it for user customer facing interactions, for example? What process do you have to have in place if you are going to roll it out in highly sensitive areas? If you're going to use it for, where you use it is going to be extremely important. And just one thing about what you mentioned, I think that's a great example of a risk that can be averted with the right guardrails and responsible AI and trustworthiness in place. Because even though Goldman, which was cutting the credit card for Apple, they were not even going out for discriminating. They were not even using the gender as a variable, but it became a very important fact. And then now the business had to go back and just eliminate that, right, or stop cutting the credit card. High impact in terms of business value, business brand and reputation, that, oh, you're discriminating against women, for example, could have been averted with the right guardrails in place. Because even though they weren't using gender as a part of their data capture, what they didn't count for is that demographic, that factor can be deduced and inferenced. So the way to do that is not to eliminate variables that you don't want to have influence your outcomes, but to put the right weight behind them and to assign the right weight. So sorry for getting a little bit more technical, but I'm just saying that the guardrails cannot just be policy. It has to go down to the level of whether it's the security folks, or whether it's the privacy folks, whether it's the data scientist, whoever that team is involved. These principles need to make sense for each role in the company.
Yeah, I think that's very important. And I think it's great that you were able to highlight how you can show the practical importance, or really, why should we put these frameworks in place? Why should we be monitoring the AI with what's happening out there, right? Like what's happening in the media, what have other organizations, what has been their experience? I think that's one great way for showing the C-suite, this is important and we need to have a formal plan in place. But another way is to really, I guess, another thing to consider when you're building out these frameworks is how are you going to actually show the value of it, right? How do you audit the actual framework to know if it's been effective? And that's a really tough question, right? Like there's key metrics that I think you can use to assess the effectiveness, but I'm curious to hear this panel. What kind of metrics do you look for, or how do you design a framework that will allow you to actually show the value of it? Have we started doing this, or are we working for organizations where the AI is perfect and so there's not much to show?
Still looking for some. I'm still looking for some. I've like thought about this very seriously and did research, and I'm still looking for some. That's why I'm smiling. It's an excellent question.
Yeah, really good question, Kuljit. I'm also interested in what the other panels think of this. The approach I take is, coming from the cybersecurity strategy world, it's proving the negative, right? How do you prove the negative? Because it didn't happen, so that's one thing. But what I am focused right now is on trust factors, right? What are the trust factors that a particular initiative requires? Remember I talked about the essential pillars of trustworthy AI that I had created based on practical and strategic experience, right? And that includes security, privacy, and those are foundational, but also things such as transparency and ethics, right? Accountability, audit. Audit in the world of AI is completely different than what is going to be in what we are seeing in the typical scenarios. But to your point as to how do you measure the effectiveness and how do you measure that, is this, I think right now we are really looking at that proving that negative, right? If you don't have an issue, if you have the right, how do you avoid those snafus where, clinical trials, for example, where, race can become an issue, where we're seeing those instances, so it is kind of taking a look at, it's sad to say, but that is what is kind of driving right now. There really is no scorecard that one can use other than proactively.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think there's opportunities from like a corporate social responsibility perspective as part of like your environmental or sustainability, like corporate governance program to really consider that. I think that's part of what we need to be thinking about here for certain. But trying to demonstrate when something wrong didn't happen is a really great challenge, Pamela.
How do you prove the counterfactual? That is a real big challenge. I'll also add that I think that sometimes there might be metrics indirectly in ways that we don't necessarily think about. And I'll give you two. One of the things I'm talking a lot about is the impact of large language models on the environment, the amount of data that's being used. And so one of the metrics that has come up is really assessing your carbon footprint of your AI systems and your models. And there are some researchers who've created tools to do that. So that might kind of lead to part of your responsible AI program. Another metric that I think is really important is the diversity of the people working on the AI solutions. And this, I think, is incredibly pertinent to this group, Women in AI. And just looking at that metric, again, it's indirect, it's not a direct thing, but I think it does speak to some of a responsible AI program. So I think there are ways to kind of wrap things in that are already happening as we also try and figure out what are the KPIs that more directly assess these technologies.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting piece. It's definitely a difficult question, and I think we're just starting to, start developing these programs and assessing what their impact is and how they are effective. I mean, one metric could be, as one component of your framework, could be understanding whether your AI systems are biased, right? And then trying to figure out how many times have you kind of, found out that there's some sort of issue with the data, gone back and assessed that. I think that could be one way to perhaps measure it. And it's one way to really show the value of a responsible AI framework, I think, because you could get really far down the road with an AI system and then realize much later that the data that we've trained it on is actually biased. And, you've spent so much time, effort, and money already building that out. So I think that's one way you could show the value, but it's definitely a metric that's kind of hard to really put into a percentage or put into a number, right? It's ongoing, and so it can be difficult. And so we have a few minutes left, and I think what I want to do is I'd like to ask each one of the panelists, what advice would you have for somebody who is trying to champion responsible AI in their organization? What would be your words of wisdom to them?
So I can jump in on that. The thing that I would advise you to do is to find your allies. And so there are other people in your organization that are likely working on issues that are related to the issues we're talking about. You probably have cybersecurity teams, maybe you have a risk committee, maybe you've got folks working in privacy already. There's going to be other people, data governance is another one, that are out there. And so can you align your work with what they're doing? And can you somehow then form a bit of a coalition? So I don't think you need to go it alone. I think that there are going to be others in your organization who are doing work that's aligned with where you want to go.
I think helping to provide solutions is very important. So as much as you want to have your allies, you want to sort of remember what's driving your work and working with your business teams and helping them recognize that there may be untapped opportunities if we are missing key groups of customers or key parts of the community. So I think just recognizing that responsible AI really should be winning for all. And there's just like so much to keep up with on this space. Sorry, go ahead, Pamela. I think it is a constant challenge to stay on top of the emerging standards, certifications, developments.
Yeah, I think, and I agree with that, both of you. And I would just add that we're in the data territory here. I mean, we're talking about data and actual lots of data. I think data is your best friend here to show what is the value we're missing out on if we don't do this. And if we don't adopt AI, and then if we don't adopt AI responsibly, this is what can go wrong. That is really one aspect. And for Jesslyn's point, I totally agree with that, which is to have a solution. This is how we can do it right for our organization and get the value. Because if we don't, right, this is where how much value we are missing out on. So excellent metrics coming out of KPIs coming out of companies that have, if you look at some of the reports from Harvard Business Review, Adidas, where they're looking at creating new KPIs, right? We are not looking at what is working in the client center or the customer center. Not just what is the success story, but what is the data that we have not been looking at and how to monetize that, right? that this is the value of AI, right? And if we don't do this, we will be losing out for. So it is extremely industry and vertical going to be based on that. But there are excellent case studies out there which can help you make your point.
We're at time. I'm going to keep it super sweet and simple. Get executive sponsorship.
Great. So thank you for joining us today in this discussion. I hope you learned a lot from the panelists. I definitely did. And to the panelists, thanks so much for joining the discussion today and sharing your insights on how to build a responsible AI framework. All right. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, everybody.